Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our viewers. On behalf of the Asia Society Policy Institute, we are delighted to welcome you to our webinar today on APEC, the achievements, insights, and the road ahead. Last week in San Francisco, from 21 economies, leaders, officials, stakeholders, press, ministers converged on the city for the APEC Leaders Week. And with this meeting, the U.S. host year for APEC has now come to a close. This has followed a series of meetings, workshops, seminars, and negotiations held throughout the year in cities all around the United States, including Detroit and Seattle. There were also other side meetings held in San Francisco last week between different leaders, as well as groups of economies talking about negotiating the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, as well as the CPTPP. Probably the meeting that got the most press attention was the Biden-Xi summit, and there already have been lots of webinars and analysis of the outcomes and the road forward for the U.S.-China relationship. But today, we're not going to focus on that. I'm sure it will come up. We're going to focus on the outcomes of APEC. And today, we'll not only focus on what was achieved, but we're going to talk about some of the challenges that the hosts and other economies faced during the year, and how this complicated efforts to make progress, how these geopolitical tensions factored in, and then looking ahead, how APEC can stay relevant as it celebrates its 30th year anniversary. And we're also just thrilled to have a colleague from Peru, the senior official from the Peruvian government, because Peru is going to be the host next year, and we'll be very interested to hear about their plans for their APEC year. To address all of these questions, we've assembled an incredible panel of 4 speakers who have all been closely involved not only in setting the APEC agenda this year, but also contributing to its success. And I'm sure most of our speakers are breathing a sigh of relief this week, with the possible exception of my colleague from Peru, who now has his work cut out for him. So with that, just very brief introductions. We're thrilled to invite Ambassador Matt Murray to our stage. He is the U.S. senior official for APEC, responsible for coordinating U.S. participation in APEC. And that's kind of the bureaucratic language describing what he did. But I have to tell you, he deserves yeoman's credit for the success this past year. He, under his leadership, working closely with the White House, with numerous government agencies, with stakeholders in APEC economies, he was able, with his team, to advance U.S. priorities in the Indo-Pacific region. Welcome, Matt. Second, we have Renato Reyes with us, who is the APEC senior official at Peru's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He is a seasoned diplomat, having previously served as Peru's DCM in Chile, and has an extensive legal and academic background in international law and diplomacy. Third, we invite to the stage Rebecca Fatima Sta. She is the executive director of the APEC Secretariat. And again, that title does not do you service, Rebecca. If anyone was in San Francisco last week, Rebecca was everywhere, making sure that everything was operating smoothly, making sure the APEC Secretariat was stepping up to the plate and helping to contribute to the success. And her unique perspectives as a senior trade official in Malaysia for many years, where I first met her, was really invaluable to her contributions to APEC. And finally, we are pleased to have Laura Lane, Executive Vice President and Chief Corporate Affairs and Sustainability Officer at UPS, join us. Importantly, for this discussion, Laura is one of the 3 U.S. members of APEC, the APEC Business Advisory Council, and I'm sure she will have a lot to contribute with respect to why business finds APEC so valuable. She has a distinguished career at the State Department, and I take great pride in stealing her from the State Department and bringing her to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, where we had the opportunity to work on many issues. And since then, she has been in the corporate boardrooms of a number of different companies. So welcome to this panel. I'm going to start with the discussion, but we will also have opportunity and time for questions from the audience. So if I can ask you to put your questions either in the Q&A or chat function, and we'll try and get to them over the next hour. All right, enough from me. Now we're going to get right into the program, and maybe I can turn to Matt Murray and ask from your perspective, what were the key achievements for the United States in its host year? Over to you, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy, and good morning, everybody, and thanks for convening this panel. With a lot of good friends here on the screen. I think that as we came into our U.S. host year, we put a lot of time, effort, energy, resources into it, and we had sort of 5 key strategic objectives that we were already always measuring our success against. We wanted to lead on multilateralism in our APEC host year. We wanted to enhance our relationship with like-minded partners. We wanted to uphold international rules and norms. We wanted to advance public-private sector collaboration. And we really wanted to deliver some key policy outcomes through APEC as a mechanism. And I think by all of those objectives, by all of those measures, I think it was a very successful APEC host year, and certainly a successful, APEC Economic Leaders Week in San Francisco last week. I think, when you look at the consensus Golden Gate Leaders Declaration that we put out on Friday, some of the key things in that declaration that I think are important to highlight. It did recall the long-term U.S. leadership in APEC, the fact that it is the 30th anniversary of the first the first APEC leaders meeting that happened in Seattle. It did address the fact that the world is changing rapidly, particularly coming out of the COVID pandemic. There are a lot of new challenges that APEC seeks to address. And of course, our theme for our APEC year was creating a resilient and sustainable future for all. It tried to, it did lift up to leaders level many of the key outcomes of our very strong ministerial slate for the year. We had the San Francisco Principles on Integrating Inclusivity and Sustainability into Trade and Investment Policy, which is attached to the document as an annex. We also lifted up to leaders level the Just Energy Transition Principles that were finalized by our energy ministers. It was the first energy ministerial in APEC since 2015. And we also advanced principles on achieving food security through sustainable agri-food systems, as well as on disaster risk reduction. And so all of those things are captured in the statement. I think the declaration also outlines how we made some progress and sort of built some momentum on energy issues, how we made some progress and built some momentum on digital issues, how we advanced anti-corruption efforts, and also how we expanded and deepened our work on inclusivity, particularly building on the legacy of the 2011 U.S. host year with the Women in Economy Forum, but then expanding in a lot of different ways there. Ambassador Tai from USTR held a really great event with indigenous leaders on trade just before the ministerial out there. And then when you look at all the different things that we did during the week, I think we revitalized the APEC CEO Summit, which was a real key for us. It was right across the street in Moscone West. There was a lot of back and forth between government officials and business people. The president gave an address there on Thursday, which I would definitely commend to anyone watching the webinar as a good resource. We held the first ever Sustainable Future Forum, which was a public-private collaboration that we did on Tuesday, featured participation by John Kerry. We held the first ever multi-stakeholder forum, thanks to Dr. Rebecca's leadership and the APEC Secretariat on really making that happen, bringing in stakeholders from around the APEC region for conversations around a just energy transition. And we did a lot of engagement with micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises through a variety of different stakeholder engagement events. So I think I really appreciate the panel you put together here, Wendy, because we had really great partnerships with the APEC Secretariat and Dr. Rebecca I think, she knows that, one of our big goals this year was to really try to strengthen APEC as an institution. We did the very best we could in that regard. Obviously, with Laura and the ABAC team, they just did amazing work being an action-oriented ABAC, I would say. And also, I think just more broadly, the private sector being that secret sauce of what makes APEC special. So really grateful that Laura is on the panel today, and she could share more about that. And then, of course, we are looking forward to 2024 and, with my good friend Renato, wanting to collaborate with them going forward. So I think, again, by every measure, I think it was a great year and a great week, and we look forward to continuing to take that work forward, as we go ahead into 2024. I'll stop there.
Well, Matt, thanks so much for that. Just a quick follow-up question for our viewers. When you mentioned deliverables, you mentioned principles, the development of principles in a number of different areas. And I know some people, when they hear that, they think, oh, what's the use of principles? It's all about enforceable binding commitments. But my view is like those principles help move towards more rigorous disciplines over time. But how do you view this notion of principles and best practices? Do you think they are indeed important?
I think there's a few reasons that they're very important. I think one is what you just said, that you establish some principles as a baseline, and then you can build on those things going forward. Whether that's in other organizations or at the WTO, wherever it may be. I think that's one reason. I think a second reason related to that is, as Dr. Rebecca and Renato and Laura know, very well, there's a good bit of distance between many of our economies in APEC on some of these issues. For example, just energy transition. I think to get all 21 economies on the same page when it comes to a just energy transition, so that we can then say, all right, this is what we're talking about, and this is what we're trying to build on going forward. I think we consider that to be, certainly a significant accomplishment. And I think a third reason that these are important is they're also a very important signal to our stakeholders. We focused a lot this year on sustainability and inclusion, and that became, the kind of the sort of the binding, force around a lot of our outcomes and deliverables. I think when we go out and talk to stakeholders, particularly micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, those were the issues that many of them were talking about and focused on. So to be able to signal that when we talk about, food security, or when we talk about just energy transition or some of the other things, I do think it's important to be able to send that clear signal to our stakeholders as well.
Well, great. Laura, let me turn to you now from a business perspective, and given your role in ABAC, how do you view the year? And from your perspective, what were the most significant deliverables?
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. And before I begin, though, I do have to echo what you said about Ambassador Murray and the incredible role he played in terms of getting the U.S. government focused on the important work being done by ABAC, and to the APEC Secretariat, Dr. Rebecca, Tony, Evelyn, all of you. I mean, those are just three that we worked so closely with. We accomplished so much because of the tremendous partnership. And so just thank you. And Wendy, I learned everything I know about how to use APEC and make it action-oriented. It's all you, man. I'm so glad I learned under you at USTR. So, but from an ABAC perspective, we had three themes that we were working under. It was equity, sustainability, and opportunity. And when I think about it, the year-long work, it was easy for all of us as business representatives to come together because we're all working on that basis, on that shared, shared set of values. So it made it relatively easy for us to develop consensus about some of the important initiatives that we needed to be working on. And I think it's why the ABAC recommendations this year were so action-oriented. we'd all come out of the pandemic and we all recognized that sense of urgency around lifting people up for economic empowerment, around, the call to action needed on sustainability in particular, and the importance of equity. Because remember, against this year, we had so many geopolitical tensions that we had to navigate as a business community. We had to find ways to bring people together. And the two that I want to call out, I'm particularly proud of ABAC's work on. And the first is with respect to the APEC Supply Chain Resilience Toolkit. And this was something that we wanted to make really practical and really tangible for businesses, particularly small and medium-sized businesses, because we recognize 80 to 90% of a lot of the economic activity among the APEC countries comes from small businesses. And we saw out of the pandemic that their supply chains were particularly challenged. So we wanted to come up with an action-oriented toolkit that would help small and medium-sized businesses be able to build in resiliency into their supply chains. And we developed a toolkit that focused on ways that small and medium-sized businesses could build in flexibility, greater visibility across their supply chain, supporting greater linkages across the APEC region, building in robustness and redundancy. And what was super cool is we had over 1,200 businesses from 15 different APEC economies involved in the development of this toolkit and drawing the lessons learned from all of those businesses. And then toward the second half of the year, we started building, setting up workshops so that businesses could begin to use the toolkit and apply it into their supply chains. And our plan is to do more of these workshops across the APEC region. In fact, I'm traveling to China next week to do a big one in partnership with the Chinese government. So that's kind of exciting. And the second one that I want to draw attention to, and obviously you'd expect UPS to talk about it, but this is where we were able to get admittedly non-binding guidelines, but guidelines nonetheless on logistics-related services so that we could support the movement of essential goods during a health emergency. Talk about taking all the lessons learned of how we kept the trade networks going globally, but particularly in the APEC region. We were able, as a business community, to talk about some of the challenges we faced and what was needed in partnership with governments to ensure that whenever the next health crisis hits, we have an ability to stand up trading frameworks to keep the world moving. And so those were just two of the examples above and beyond the great work on sustainability, the great work on women's economic empowerment, and the important discussions that happened to form the foundation for additional work on a regional free trade agreement for the region. So good stuff all around, I think.
Just a quick follow-up, because ABAC, like the APEC economies, you all need to reach a consensus and work with these 21 economies. Were there challenges working with these other economies to come up with these recommendations, or were you kind of surprised how a lot of the views of businesses around the region are converging on some of these extremely important and timely matters?
I love that you asked that question, Wendy, because I was pretty surprised at some of the quick consensus we were able to reach. And maybe it helped that, the chair of our sustainability committee, for example, came from China, Frank Ng. I mean, what a tremendous partner we had in him leading a lot of the discussions on sustainability. And so where you see governments being able to forge consensus with Secretary Kerry working with the Chinese government, we as business were able to do the same. And so that was quite rewarding. The fact that the Chinese are picking up, the sustainability and resilience toolkit for SMEs, I think is another example of that. The Chinese government is going to do a whole expo to train, thousands of small and medium-sized businesses about how to keep their supply chains resilient. And so even though against the backdrop of a year where, there were tensions at the governmental level with China, as a business community and picking up on the areas of consensus, we were able to move forward. The one area that, our diplomacy skills were challenged, and we were taking a lot of lessons from Ambassador Murray about how to navigate this, was unfortunately with the rising tensions involving Russia and Ukraine. And I think that challenged us in a lot of the statements and the outcomes of each set of meetings. We tried our best to navigate those overarching tensions and find areas of consensus still. I can't say that it was easy, but we found ways to continue constructive dialogue and work through each of our committees, and tried to find common ground with particularly our Russian APEC delegates. And I think we approached all of the issues with that spirit of business cooperation, and that helped make a lot of the discussions very constructive and fruitful. But it wasn't an easy year for sure. But, if it's easy, anybody would do it. But, we had great APEC representation and great APEC leadership, and we found a way forward. So,
well, that's great to hear. And, for this to work, the APEC members really need to put a lot of resources and time into the work. And so I'm sure the U.S. government is very grateful to our APEC members, including you, Laura, for doing that, because it's not easy. And there are a lot of meetings all over the world. Dr. Rebecca, let me turn to you. The other two speakers have alluded to some of these challenges that APEC is facing, including these geopolitical tensions, including, this post-COVID world, and including a lot of, the climate change types of challenges. I'd be interested in your views on how APEC was able to kind of navigate through a lot of these tensions and challenges, and kind of your reflections now that APEC is 30 years old. Do you see a path forward for working more on these types of issues going forward?
Thanks, Wendy. Good to see all of our friends back on the screen. Yesterday, we were just in San Francisco. Now, I think one of if I were to think back on the year, the APEC 2023, one word would stand out for me, and that's engagement. The amount of engagement and collaboration that went into the year. I think Matt and his team put in a lot of effort to make sure there was stakeholder engagement at almost every meeting. I think in my time in APEC, and I've been in this forum for many, many years, this was the year where we saw a really, really high level of engagement with different parts of society, of business in every meeting. At the ministers' meeting, we had representatives, for example, the women's ministers' meeting, we had representatives from women MSMEs in the room telling us where we did well and where areas where we could do better. With the energy minister, we had businesses come in to say, here's what what just energy transition means to us and for us. And we had folks with disabilities speak at the Human Resource Development Working Group. We had indigenous, the forum, the dialogue with the indigenous peoples was so powerful. Just to see if you're talking about engagement and inclusiveness, it happened this year in a big way. So when I think at the end of the day, it's not so much the geopolitics. Yes, that was the background noise. But what happened in the meetings, in the various fora and workshops was engagement, the will and the commitment to move forward. APEC was so active this year. I must say, Laura, in my experience, this year, we saw APEC. APEC was omnipresent. They were in all our meetings. I remember a time when I went to an APEC meeting to say, you folks help us set up the policy partnership for food security, and you are not there. The meetings, that's the whole idea. But this year specifically, there was such a high level of engagement. I think that made a lot of difference. To have the ministers here, to have the policymakers hear from the businesses what they expect of us. So really, yes, there was, the noise of the geopolitical tensions, whatever, but in the room, there was this will and commitment to work and to move forward and to get to engage and focus on what is it, why are we here, the whole idea of why we exist as APEC. That came through, and really the effort and the energy that Matt and his team put in, working with the different economies, working with APEC, with the different groups to ensure that we made meaning, for this year. I think that was, for me, the biggest takeaway, engagement.
And maybe I can follow up on that. I mean, for the many years I worked on APEC, investment and trade liberalization seemed to be kind of the overarching goal. And that's changed. And it's interesting when I listen to the deliverables that both Matt and Laura talk about. We're talking about supply chains, talking about food security, talking about inclusivity and bringing small and medium-sized enterprises more into the system. Do you see that? Like, is APEC successfully kind of pivoting to the new agenda?
Yes, you would see that. I mean, we used to say trade and investment, our bread and butter. But when we were drawing up the vision, the APEC Putrajaya Vision 2040, you see the three pillars, the three drivers, the three economic drivers, and that's where you've started to see, and that was our effort to reflect the reality on the ground. You can't just talk of trade and investment without talking of environment, without talking of impact on human rights, labor rights. We can't. Those were the days when we just focused on market access, facilitating trade, facilitating investment. But today it's different. The realities are different. And so when we were drawing up the vision, we talked this through, and that's why you have those three economic drivers: trade and investment, digitalization and innovation, and essentially sustainable and inclusive growth. So the work streams in APEC have incorporated in a big way sustainability and inclusivity. In all the work streams, you would see these aspects being reflected. The vision statement was very well drafted. But, vision statements, you and I would say, so what, right? And so New Zealand did a very good job working with all of us to get the Aotearoa plan of action in place. And then you have it. APEC, I think, is all about continuity and building on each year. And it's not a one-off, one event per year, but building on each year. And then Thailand decided that, let's be very focused on sustainability. And so the Bangkok goals, the biocircular green economy model was what we took to explain our work in the sustainability area. And the US took it one step further, building on all the work, with the Manoa agenda specifically, building on the work that we did in the past few years. So really, you will see the conversation is about how sustainable, what is the social impact, the environmental impact of all the work that we're doing. I think that's coming more and more to the fore. Conversation around digital transformation. There's a lot of work that APEC did on digital transformation, what we need to do with digitalization and innovation. That builds into all the conversations that we're having. And interestingly, this is something I noticed in San Francisco. yes, there were protests, the Palestinian, pro-Palestinian protests, but there were also protests on APEC talking about, APEC needs, where's the people in APEC, inclusivity. They were asking about sustainability, questions around climate change. And those conversations were exactly what was happening in the room. But folks, it seems like, folks didn't get that message that APEC was about inclusivity, was about sustainability. Climate change, a big discussion, whether it was among the policymakers or even in the business community, the CEO summit. But somehow, we need to do more about messaging this, that we're not just about trade and investment and not just about making money or not about just focusing on business, but really about the other aspects that matter to people.
Hey, Wendy, would it be okay to jump in here?
Absolutely.
Because I was just going to reinforce what Dr. Rebecca said, because I think, over the course of 30 years, APEC has done an amazing job in terms of bringing the business community and stakeholder voices into the discussions that governments were having and setting that foundation about the importance of trade and investment flows. But what I think is the shift that's happening is, how do we ensure that everybody realizes the benefits of trade and that the shared investment between countries yields positive outcomes for everyone in each of these economies? And so I see the work that we're doing a reinforcement of the important trade and investment foundation that was laid originally, because you can lower the tariffs and create the investment protections, but if everything stops at the border because you don't have effective trade facilitation, all the benefits of those negotiated trade changes aren't going to be realized by everyone. And so, in response to Mara Lee's question about the trade facilitation elements being important as part of a trade pillar, I think they are absolutely important. We needed to have that toolkit in place so businesses could better understand what they needed to do to reinforce their supply chains so that they could keep moving across borders. And similarly, I would argue a lot of the investment protections that we've talked over time in the APEC discussions needed to be reinforced by understanding that investments are made more robust when they're thought of in that regional context, when people recognize that investments are fueled by the supply chains that support those investments, and those supply chains are regionally based. And I think those were two important lessons learned, that you've got to, in order to keep trade and investment flowing, you have to focus on the real practical issues of, how to build resilient supply chains. And now, obviously, in a world focused on climate change, how to make sustainable supply chains, as well as having, trade facilitation built into everything that you do. So it isn't just the big businesses, but also the small and medium-sized businesses that can realize the benefits of a more robust region that works together on shared values and shared principles.
Extremely well put, Laura. Renato, let me now turn to you. I'm sure Matt and Laura in particular are expressing relief at the year being over. Dr. Rebecca is going to have to work closely with you next year. So for you now, the Peru host year is going to start. One of the first APEC meetings I attended was in Peru, I believe in 2008, and Peru hosted again in 2016, and now again next year. I know it's very early in the process, but can you share with us some of the vision or practical objectives that Peru is now developing for its APEC year, and how it plans to kind of build on the outcomes, not only from the U.S. year, but as Dr. Rebecca mentioned, from the New Zealand and the Thailand year, because continuity is extremely important in APEC. But at the same time, the host government really wants to put its mark on the year. So please share with us some of your thinking and plans right now.
Thank you very much, Wendy, and all our colleagues, panelists, colleagues. Good morning, buenos dias to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. And also, I want to join you in congratulating Ambassador McMurray and all his team. They really did an awesome year. They had just 10 months to start building up, to start the work of its host year. It's really amazing what they did this year, and really congratulate for that. We will try to follow that example. And I want to start sharing with you that being in this position for more than 2 years, if I could just say what APEC means in one sentence, is a lot for developing best practices. As it is a non-binding organization or fora, this is a place where we, the 21s, try to develop policies and good practices which could be a useful tool to develop domestic initiative or laws. Maybe it could be a reference for our policymakers and also for international organizations. There are a number of examples of that. For instance, that the World Trade Organization have followed or have built on APEC policies that have developed in some years. So this is APEC. And coming back to your answer, we will build on the Putrajaya vision, the APEC goal for the 2040 that we have now in place, and also we will build in its plan of action, which is the Aotearoa plan of action, the Bangkok Goal Biocircular Green also, but also we will build on the US legacy this year. And my team and I, we have been really carefully introducing some paragraph in the joint ministerial declaration and also in the Golden Bridge APEC leaders declaration this year. There are some special sentences that we included there in order to implement this next year those objectives with some deliverables. So we will, in one of our retreats that we senior officials have this year, a colleague from the Philippines told us that they did some research that one of the big challenges that the Philippines has is that to implement the number of objectives that APEC has had during many years. And he said that for the Philippines, it will take like 40 to 50 years to implement that. So with that in mind, our goal is to develop next year some practical deliverables that could be followed by many. For instance, we will work we will build on the Detroit non-binding principles and recommendations for equality and inclusion in education, training, and employment as a reference, as a starting point to develop a roadmap on how to move people from the informal sector to the formal economy and eventually to the global economy. We will try to develop a really practical roadmap with 5 or 6 key areas where we are working on right now. With the support of the USA, it has been instrumental since last year. We have had training models with the support of the Department of State in unpacking our deliverables. So we are approaching to that, and also we will build on the just energy transition. We have started already working on that we will also like to develop a roadmap with best practices around the world, but particularly in the Asia Pacific region, on how to implement a low emission hydrogen. One of them would be the green hydrogen, which has the property of that it could create energy with zero emissions, but also green hydrogen could help people storage energy and transport energy. So this is another deliverable that we would like to achieve next year. And also following this year's discussion, we will also build on the Digital Pacific Agenda. We consider that the innovation and digital connectivity could be tool to empower people to be more inclusive, and for instance to encourage the transition of informal actors into the formal economy. I will stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think that gives us some insight into not only what you want to achieve, but I think what was great to hear is, again, the continuity aspect of what you will be pursuing. Matt, if I can turn to you and take one of the questions from our audience, but maybe frame it in a broader context as well. The U.S. faced a lot of challenges in its APEC year. One of them, let's just be honest, by the time we were given the green light to host, 2023 had started already. So we kind of had a late start. There were also a series of geopolitical challenges as well. And other challenges, I'm sure that some you may want to share, some may not. But there's also great interest in how did the U.S. and China get along during this APEC year? Did China hold up some of the work we wanted to do, or was this an area where we could find some common ground? And, did that relationship between the U.S. and China in APEC changed during the year, particularly as the U.S. and China over the past few months have been working hard to increase channels of communication and to stabilize the relationship? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. I came into this role in February of 2022. And before I started as U.S. senior official, I had come from a little bit of a China background. I've served in China a couple times, and I asked a lot of the other APEC economies, how should we deal with China in APEC? And I think one of our counterparts from another economy, basically said, look, the other 19 economies don't come to APEC meetings to watch mom and dad fight. So, please don't do that. And so they said, look, be very clear and very transparent about what your guardrails are and what you're trying to do when it comes to China. So I basically came into my time in 2022, with two guidelines. One was that if I felt like China was undermining APEC as an institution, then we would push back. And if I felt like China was undermining international rules and norms, then we would push back. But we weren't going to push back just because we disagreed with them. And we wanted to get away from an APEC environment where we reflexively objected to everything they said and they reflexively objected to everything we said. So I think having those guardrails was helpful. And I think it created some space where we could have some constructive conversations. And we didn't agree on everything in our host year. And I see Dr. Rebecca nodding, as she knows, we didn't agree on everything. But we had some constructive conversations, and I made a point every single time that I was at a senior officials meeting. I always met with my counterpart. Mike Pyle is our SOM chair, always met with, the PRC. We had, a lot of ministerial engagements and vice ministerial engagements throughout the year, a lot of working group level engagements. And the fact is that, China is a really important part of APEC. When we talk about APEC being 60% of the world's GDP and half of global trade, China plays a huge role in that. So you do have to figure out ways to have constructive conversations. And I do think that in many of the outcomes that you see in the Golden Gate Declaration and also in the ministerial statement, they only happen because of long-term sustained constructive engagement, to use Rebecca's word, with China. I think as we got to, the president's meeting with Xi Jinping, and as the planning really started in earnest, for that, I think Obviously, both sides wanted to see that be successful. And, it was in an APEC context. So I would not characterize it that it was easier towards the end of the year. But I would say that the lines of communication were more open. The channels of communication were more open, possibly as we got towards the end of the year. So that was helpful. But the other thing is, I know this isn't the webinar for the US-China piece or the Xi Jinping POTUS bilat. But what I do think from the APEC perspective was really important for us is it was another reminder that APEC can serve as a really key platform to convene meetings like this one. And so I think for it to have happened in the middle of the week, for it to have set a positive tone, there were many references to it on Thursday and Friday in the leaders' meetings and around the halls of the CEO Summit and in the president's speech at the CEO Summit. So I think that was a really positive, outcome and a great reminder of, again, over the last 30 plus years, what APEC has meant as an institution to the region, not just because of all the economic policy outcomes we're talking about today, but because of the convening power of APEC to be a platform for meetings like the president's bilateral meeting with Xi Jinping.
Well, thanks for that. And now just one more question. Could you give our viewers a sense of the actual leaders' discussion? I mean, how President Biden put some topics on the table and leaders go around the table and discuss these issues. What was on the minds of leaders this year? What were the main subjects of conversation?
Well, there were two. There was a leaders meeting on Thursday, which was an informal dialogue that also included guest economies. The guest economies this year were Colombia, Fiji, and India. And that discussion really focused on sustainability, climate change, the just energy transition. And John Kerry, Special Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, really helped, sort of facilitate that discussion. I think, what really came up there again is that there is a remarkable convergence around the importance of sustainability and climate and energy issues throughout the APEC region. I think as economies look around the corner and they look into the future and they see the challenges that they're facing over the medium to longer term, they really do want to collaborate on these issues. And I think that really came through in that discussion at the leaders level. I think the challenge, obviously, is that there's still some differences among APEC economies with, how we do that, how we go forward. Are we setting targets? How is our work complementary to what's going to happen at the COP in Dubai in a few weeks? There's a lot of those kinds of questions, but I think it was a great opportunity to be able to focus on those issues at leaders level. And then the second day, the leaders retreat was interesting in the sense that it was a little bit of everything. The president kind of put it out there that, we want to talk about some of the sort of the nexus between sort of the inclusivity pieces that we were talking about earlier, but also the challenges of technology and digital and how we move forward. And so you had a whole range of discussions around, how to make, trade work for the region. Artificial intelligence also came up a few times. There were discussions, around, kind of the future of institutions like APEC. There were a lot of, different points of view raised from around the table. But again, this great convening power that you're going from, the president to the Sultan of Brunei to Prime Minister Trudeau to President Xi Jinping to President Jokowi. It was amazing to go around the table and hear all those, views be able to be expressed and shared, in that couple of hours that they were in the room together. And again, I think that then strengthens not only the institution of APEC, but strengthens the ties between these leaders and enables them to be able to reach out on a more regular basis and try to work through some of these challenges.
Wendy, I was just going to jump in here because I'm so glad Ambassador Murray raised it. That has been the work on digital trade has been really robust within the APEC, dialogue, because a lot of the businesses big and small, have been talking about these important enabling rules that make the trade and investment regime more robust, inclusive, and providing opportunity for all. And there's been great work done on establishing important understandings around the need for harmonization on those digital trade rules, as well as we as APEC came together and put forward guidelines and a statement on the importance of use of AI. In other words, AI for good, but also putting the guardrails to ensure that the values that we all share as a collective community are understood and a part of any governmental decisions on how AI is going to be regulated going forward. And so I just wanted to reinforce that there was really good cutting edge discussion and dialogue throughout the year about the importance of these issues being addressed, and we saw them captured as well in the leaders' discussion. And I think that was important.
Thanks for that. Dr. Rebecca, kind of over to you. When you look back at the past, let's say 3-4 APEC years, any lessons learned or advice that you want to share with our Peruvian colleague as they prepare for next year?
Well, they've been preparing. They've been preparing the last couple of years, and we've had collaboration from US aid, from our Secretariat officials as well, working with Renato and his team to help, formulate the ideas and priorities. The Policy Support Unit has also been working very closely with Renato in coming up with, in framing their priorities. So all I can say is, Renato, we are here for you. We're working very closely with your team and to ensure it will be a successful year. Very important, as you know, APEC is not a one-off event each year. It's a continuity, as we've said, and building on each year. And with Peru focusing so much on the informal economy to the formal economy, basically you will see a lot of discussions around strengthening MSMEs, women's contribution to the economy, specifically from the informal sector where they are more present, to the formal sector. So we'll hear a lot more of this. We'll be anticipating a lot of robust discussions with indigenous folks as well. The indigenous economy, I'm sure, would feature very strongly. The experience that we've gained from the engagement, that part, the engagement that we've managed this year, the multi-stakeholder forum that was held, I look forward to seeing continuation of that work into Peru's year as well. Continuing to engage with women, with people with disabilities, with indigenous peoples. I think that the strength of APEC is its ability to bring these disparate voices into the room, and for policymakers need to hear these voices. So I look forward to working with Peru. I'm sure we're going to have an exciting year, another fruitful year for APEC.
Renato, maybe you want to respond to that?
Thank you, Rebecca, for your support. But it has been really instrumental. All the help we have received during the past 2 years from the USA, as I mentioned earlier, particularly from the Department of State, through the training programs that the USA has developed for more than 150 people here of our live agencies, but also from the Secretariat. It has been instrumental, as Rebecca said, how the program directors, the PSU, and the same Rebecca, sometimes I have had some meetings with her to ask some advices, and so we'll try to do our best, and we are really excited about that. There is a huge amount of work, as Matt, my good friend Matt, will also say. There are more than 160 meetings that we will also organize next year, as Matt did this year. So we will try to follow all of that, building on the continuity of the APEC policies and goals, we will try to be supportive on that.
That's great to hear. And maybe the final question to Matt then. We talked a bit about this Golden Gate Declaration, but my understanding there was also kind of a chair statement where some of the kind of geopolitical divisions or differences in views were captured. Can you explain? I mean, is that a accurate assessment, and why was this approach taken?
Yeah, so before getting to that question, I did want to say about what Renato just said, that we've been working closely with Renato as well for the last year and a half on this transition from the Thailand year to the U.S. year to the Peru year, and I think that point about continuity is really important. And so again, I just want to say we're looking forward to supporting Peru's host year next year as we go forward. I think on the separate chair statement, if we go back a year, obviously Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022. That became a challenging, very challenging aspect for APEC, as we very much prize consensus as an organization. And when during Thailand year, we tried to include mention of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, given that Russia was a member of the organization. And given that there was such a tremendous economic impact of that war on the region, every time we try to do that in ministerial meetings in 2022, we failed to reach consensus. And then we got to Leaders Week, and Thailand did an amazing job following up on the G20 in Bali to be able to get ministerial and leaders consensus on that language. You fast forward to 2023, there was, again, challenges with getting to consensus on ministerial statements because of the Russia-Ukraine issue. And then going into Leaders Week, I think that many of us were optimistic that we would be able to land at a similar place that Thailand did last year by including mention of Russia-Ukraine in the leaders' declaration. But then, of course, it got a lot more complicated with the conflict in the Middle East. And, we certainly had economies who felt very strongly about that, very understandably. We also had other economies that weren't sure, can we square that circle, in APEC to start including other things. And then, other economies saying, well, if you're going to include Russia, Ukraine, and you're going to include the Middle East, then you also have to include some other things. And so I think that we got to a point, and it happened very, very late in the statement negotiations, where a decision was made that we were going to have to handle these, geopolitical issues in a different channel. And so with the support of, our colleagues, in the White House and around the interagency, we moved forward with this a bit of a shift to have the Golden Gate Declaration be all by consensus on the APEC issues, and then to issue the separate chair statement, which addressed Russia, Ukraine, addressed the Middle East, but also said that there was varying opinions around the table as to whether or not APEC was the right place to address these issues. And look, it's not going to get any simpler or straightforward as we go forward. There are a lot of challenges in this area. We do want to try to stay as focused as we can on the economic policy side, but then there's issues like Russia, Ukraine that have a significant impact on the economics of the region, and so they also can't be ignored. So. We'll see how Renato shepherds this issue going forward next year. Certainly, I think we ended up last week in the best possible place of acknowledging these geopolitical concerns while also supporting that consensus principle in APEC through the Golden Gate Declaration. And so we're extremely pleased with where we landed. I'm not going to lie, the week would have been a lot less stressful if we had landed there a little bit earlier, but we got there in the end.
A little stress is always good. And with that, let me conclude this webinar. Thank you to our viewers, but a special thanks to Matt, Laura, Dr. Rebecca, and Renato, who literally probably haven't gotten enough sleep for the past year. So the fact that they found time to join this webinar, we are extremely grateful. And we look forward to working with you, Renato, next year as you and your government navigate through APEC. And again, big thanks. I think we all the better sense not only the value of APEC, but the contribution of APEC and the importance of this contribution during these times of geopolitical tensions. Thank you very much. For the viewers, have a great day, a great evening, or a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.